Hello. Yes. Okay. I'm just going to pass over the reins now from me to our amazing panelists and panels. We have Rob, who is our co-moderator and also the president of the BC and Yukon Book Prizes, who we're hosting this panel in partnership with. Rob is an educator, researcher, and consultant who works primarily with YA literature and 2S LGBTQ2, I was about to say 2S again, plus representation. We also have our other co-moderator, as introduced earlier today, Yaunna, our team member, lovely, lovely team member. And she will be co-hosting with Rob and hosting our amazing panelists, Sabina, Rob as well, actually, and DF, who is representing Iron Dog Books today. Thank you so much, everyone. You will not see me now.
Well, I guess I can start off. Well, I already sort of introduced myself, but thank you so much for having me here, and I'm really excited to have this chat with Sabina and DF and Yaunna. I don't have anything super specific to start because I was already introduced, but I think maybe we can just do a quick round of introductions from Sabina and DF and Yaunna, and then we can get on our way. So who would like to start? Maybe Yaunna, our co-moderator.
Sure. Hi, my name is Yaunna Sommersby, and I am obviously I'm part of the Infusion team. I work for Modern Dog and Modern Cat magazine here in Vancouver. My mom is an author. My family in general, we're all very creative. My dad works in film. My little brother is also a writer, and my other little brother is into graphic design and film editing and stuff. So creative energy around the house all the time. And I have three very spoiled tuxedo cats. So they are my buddies and have been keeping everybody in this house sane during the past insane 2 years. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing another year of Infusion.
Awesome. Let's go with DF next.
All right. Hi, I'm DF. As mentioned, I am representing Iron Dog Books today. I'm the inventory manager there. I am also a writer and fiber artist. I'm currently actually based in the same place that Infusion is taking part of, the unceded stolen lands of the Tsawwassen, Semiahmoo, Katsi, and Kwantlen nations, which is colonially known as Surrey, BC. And I'm really excited to talk about books and what it means to show up for diversity in books, because it's been a big topic for us at the store and in the book publishing world in general. And I get to see kind of firsthand how people actually literally show up. So I have some thoughts on that.
Awesome, thank you. And Sabina.
I'm Sabina Khan. I'm the author of The Love and Lives of Roxana Ali, which came out a couple of years ago. And Zara Hussein is here, which came out earlier this year. And I don't know if you can see the yellow cover in the back on the wall. It's called Meet Me in Mumbai. That's coming out in July. And I'm an educational consultant. Well, I was until this year, until last year, when, didn't really want to be too close to anyone. But yeah, so I've been doing that. I run an educational consulting business. I've been doing that for the last 25 years, and but I'm writing full time as of last year. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here and meet all of you and see some of you again. So yeah, thank you for having me here.
Awesome. So I don't know, Yaunna and I didn't really discuss it beforehand, but how do we want to do it with questions? Do you want me to ask them, or do you have some questions you'd want to start with?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the theme of the panel is, as audiences continue to make noise and demand representation and demand better, books from publishers and authors themselves, what can they do to continue to show up? That's the overall theme. So I guess we can start just with that. What do you think readers can do to continue to show up and encourage progression and representation?
Who wants to go first?
I can start. I mean, the easy thing that I always say to folks is, you know, just keep buying the things that you want to read about, and expand also into topics that maybe you're a little bit less comfortable about. The great thing about YA is that it really can be a watermark for what big publishing in particular is going to publish when it comes to adult fiction, because you're reading at a younger age. And so if they're seeing a groundswell of a particular topic or a particular style of writing, then, you know, in their minds, they're going to start to think, well, these readers are going to want to continue to read these types of things. And we often just say, you know, to folks, like, keep coming to us, and us being indies. It's not, obviously I'm here representing Iron Dog, but we're so spoiled in Vancouver for indie bookstores. And I think something that's really hard to communicate to folks is how much it really means, not just to your local community, in terms of, you know, supporting local business, but reps and publishers see those numbers, and they see these big pockets emerging out of the indie market, and that tells them, okay, there's a big groundswell for, you know, diversity, whether it be queer content, BIPOC content. These are little blips when it comes to the big guys, but if you're coming to your local indie, we can kind of curate and personalize the experience for you too.
Yeah, thank you. Sabina, did you want to go next?
Yes, please. Yeah, so I obviously agree with everything DF just said. And I think I just want to add, in addition, also libraries. I mean, you know, that's when, you know, when my children were younger, I couldn't really afford to buy a lot of books. So libraries were really a special place for us. And to know that, you know, that you can request, even if they don't have certain books in their collection, they can, you know, you can request them, and the more you request, the more, you know, and you know, maybe dialogue with librarians about, you know, what kind of books you want to see if you're not finding them in your local library. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, coming from sort of the other, like the educational, at least in the university and high school side of things, I mean, showing up really does mean, like, how do instructors and how do teachers, you know, how can they support and how can they ask for more as well, you know, and that means, you know, what books are being used in classrooms, what books are being recommended to students through book lists if they're not able to teach directly into their curriculum, you know. And for me, as like when I am able to teach sessionally, one of the big things I try to think of is how can I try to support authors beyond just recommending them in my class? Is there a way that I can work with my department to make certain books, you know, a required reading for one of my courses? Can I work with other professors to try and like help them, you know, think of people who aren't necessarily New York Times bestsellers who need, you know, a boost in order to ensure that those sales continue? So that's something that I often bring up that some of my colleagues don't always think of right away, because they, you know, and for good reason, they think, you know, this is the curriculum I want to teach. But, you know, there's ways of teaching certain curriculum while also finding ways to encourage diverse readership and reading, and actually also helping to boost those sales to a certain degree. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback off of that, do you guys have any books that you would recommend in terms of using in a classroom, or, you know, to cover those topics that we are seeing an influx of in terms of YA literature? Are there any books that you would want to recommend or want to see used in more curriculums?
Well, Sabina's obviously.
Yes, of course.
You know.
Adib Khurram's books are amazing. Darius the Great, the two books. Sorry, Rob, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no. You talk for a second. I'm just looking at my bookshelf to see if I can like, think of things.
I'm just, yeah, it's kind of like, as soon as somebody asks me, I'm like, what? There's so many. Any like, you know, I don't know. I mean, like the you know, in high school they're teaching, I don't know, in high school, in elementary school, they're teaching mythology, but it's always the Greek and Roman Eurocentric mythologies. I mean, there's so many amazing books there that kids would love and be so, you know, invested in, that are from, you know, that are based on mythologies from other areas, from other regions of the world that we don't see it, but are so fascinating and would really teach something, you know, from, even though they're entertaining mostly, but then there's also this huge educational factor. If you start talking about a book that's super fun for the kids, even, you know, all ages, but then also teaches you something brand new, and kids get so pumped up by that, because I know when my daughter was in grade 4, she started reading the Percy Jackson series, and they were also in grade whatever 5 or 6, they were also teaching the Greek and you know, they had the unit on Greek mythology, and the kids went nuts. I mean, they were just like going to the library and getting books and wanting to learn more and more outside of just the fun part of it, just, you know, because they were so intrigued by it. And I feel like you should, you know, I feel like the schools should include other mythologies. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's so fascinating. I mean, I'm crazy about mythology, but,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I think that's such a great age for kids to, you know, kind of to draw them in. And then from there, their reading interests will automatically diversify when, you know, when you get them at a young age.
Absolutely. I used to be a bookseller at Indigo, and I worked in the kid section, dealt with a lot of the middle grade and YA books, and would be recommending them to kids or parents or whatever. And something that's great about the Percy Jackson series is, or Rick Riordan, is he now has the imprint of Rick Riordan Presents, and there's a whole bunch of other books outside of the Greek and Egyptian mythology that are starting to come out within that are, like you mentioned, other mythologies that kids would probably be interested in and see themselves in and learn from. And yeah, it's a great imprint. And there's lots of different books within that are coming out. And so there's so many authors that imprint has been supporting, and so many diverse mythologies being represented.
It's been a huge series, or at least imprint for us. And on that topic, I think too, it's a lot of what folks can do is just, you know, maybe rethink about what they want. A lot of what we get asked for tends to revolve around kind of current events, and something that we've really tried to do is kind of diversify what we carry instead of kind of the same you know, basic narratives that we see. I really point to Indigenous literatures in this regard. There's a lot of, you know, trauma narratives, and those are important, but there are a lot of really great authors who are writing about Indigenous hope, and they're writing from their own mythological traditions and storytelling. We've, speaking of books that we really had success offering to teachers and librarians for classroom sets has been David Robertson's The Barren Grounds, which is part of the Misawa saga. And it's just a brilliant tale because you have someone speaking from their own background, their own storytelling, but in a way that kids who have never heard these stories and are not exposed to them can really engage them and jump onto them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, speaking of Indigenous literature, another great one that just came out recently is Walking Between Two Worlds by Wab Canoe, which just came out recently. It's fantastic. It's about gaming. It's about what it means to, like, you know, figure out what it means to be in part of an Indigenous community. It also features a young man, a Uyghur, a young man from, you know, immigrating from China. And sort of, it's got these two storylines, and sort of how these two teens are trying to deal with with their own ways of, you know, understanding what it means to be part of multiple communities and multiple worlds themselves. And another one that's really great is A Lots Away by Darcy Little Badger. Speaking of imprints that are really working hard, like Rick Riordan, Arthur Levine started a new publishing arm last year called Levine Corrido. And they do a lot of great stuff with Indigenous literature, with literature from all sorts of different, you know, racial backgrounds, with a lot of different representation in gender and sexuality. And it's really fascinating and wonderful to see, especially somebody with that influence within publishing. I mean, Arthur Levine has, you know, been quite well known within publishing, at least for, you know, Harry Potter, but he's moved on and gone into, you know, working with his editors and his team to create a super diverse list. Mm-hmm. If I may, a couple other books that came to mind while I was, is, you know, one of the people who has spoken at Infusion before is Tanya Bothaju, and Bruised is another great book that they've written, which features roller derby, which isn't something that necessarily comes up in YA a lot, but I love that it does in this one. When You Get the Chance by Tom Ryan and Robin Stevenson, it got delayed like by a year because of COVID, so it's finally out, and I would highly recommend that one. Couple other Canadians. I'm really trying to work on the Canadian content of my book talks because of the BC Yukon Book Prizes thing, but also because there's just so many great authors. Indivisible by Daniel Aleman is really great. And so is Thanks a Lot Universe by Chad Lucas. It's upper middle grade, but super, super good. And then Both Sides Now by Peyton Thomas, who is an author out of Toronto. And it features a transgender protagonist, and it's beautifully done. They did an event with Susan Nielsen recently. That was great. I think that, I can't remember which event that was with, but I think that was Vancouver Writers Fest. So yeah,
really
that's
anything
just
by
some...
Robin Stevenson as well.
Sorry?
Anything by Robin Stevenson. Her books are so profound, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, and again, to kind of continue this conversation in terms of imprints and publishing and all of that, one of the questions that I was thinking of is, on the other side of, okay, what can readers do better? What do you think publishers can do better? Because sometimes it can feel, you know, rather performative on their end, you know, as a corporation, and anything, you know, any major corporation, there's always that time of year or that post that they'll do, and it can feel rather performative instead of, okay, like, what are you actually doing? What actionable things are you doing to make change and make sure that your authors are diverse, and instead of just, you know, choosing a diverse author because they're diverse, right? Like that's not acceptable. And so discuss.
Well, I have thoughts on that. Is it okay if I go first?
Please.
So, you know, it's one thing, and it's admirable, yes, to, you know, to sign diverse authors, but then also to promote them and make sure their books actually do well, so that then that can be like, you know, then they can continue to write books and actually be able to make a living, you know, from said writing. Because sometimes you do see, like, yes, they have a roster of, you know, names, but then you never really hear about the books. You only hear about the top 5 books over and over and over again. And, you know, the authors of those books are amazing, wonderful authors, but they're already bestsellers. They're already, you know, they don't really need that much marketing, in my opinion. Like at some point, it's like, you know, like if like I don't pretend to know any of the, like, the financial, you know, budget type things that publishers do or have to do, but just like, you know, just like a common sense type of thing for me would be, I mean, if I know that this author is so famous, I'm already going to buy their books. So, people are already going to buy their books. Like, use some of that, the money towards promoting the authors that people don't know yet, because their books, I'm sure are equally well written and equally, profound or whatever. And, that it gives them a chance, because then you can't turn around and, you don't put any marketing and promo behind them and then turn around and say, well, their book didn't do that well. So, well, of course it didn't do well because nobody knew about them, and, then nobody was talking about them. So I think that's also something to keep in mind, when you talk about performative action, I mean, performative, signing of authors that fall into the diverse category and things like that. I think, I mean, it's, I'm sure, I mean, there are a lot of publishers are doing it, but, I've only ever worked with one publisher and I'm very happy with what they've done. But I've had conversations with other authors, and you start noticing that there's really, like, it's like, they signed the deal, they wrote the book, and then it's just like they disappeared into oblivion, and you don't ever see them mention it. So
yeah, that's a major issue within the publishing industry, I think, and it's something that has been hotly discussed in my household and with a mother that is an author as well. And she had her young adult book come out in 2018 after a crazy journey with it, and there was supposed to be a sequel, and that was supposed to come out in March of 2020. And in January of 2020, they decided that they were only going to be moving it to digital only instead of actually printing the physical copies, because the first book, quote unquote, did not do well enough, even though there wasn't the marketing behind it, which, is so unfortunate, I think, just from the experience that I've had within the publishing industry as a bookseller, as someone that works for a magazine, as someone that has an author in my house. Like, it just doesn't make sense, and it seems like it's such a flawed part of the publishing industry in terms of, provide the marketing support to new authors with your authors that are already, bestsellers. And yes, of course, those best-selling authors keep the lights on and keep the industry running and keep the publisher running, but so could the newer authors that you're signing on, like, if that marketing support was behind them.
DF, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is maybe where the imprints are going to start to come in and make some noise. One that comes to mind that we didn't talk about was Cynthia Latich-Smith is working with HarperCollins on Heart Drum. Yeah. And we've already seen a few titles through that have just been phenomenal. And I think that's really the key. Is it's one thing to sign a diverse lineup of authors, but if you have the same people who have been kind of, the standard bearer or what has been considered the kind of the default in publishing, generally white men, if these are the people who are signing these authors, it's really hard to trust that they're going to be given those marketing campaigns. So we're really excited. I'm really excited to see people like Cynthia Latich-Smith, or over at Simon & Schuster, they have Charlemagne the God running partially Black Privilege imprint. And hopefully that means that, these people who know where these authors are coming from a lot more intimately than the traditional publishing channels, they'll be able to not only give these books their just due, but also market them in a way that is appealing to a broader audience. Because I think that's where sometimes things get lost in the shuffle, is a lot of times we talk to our reps and they're doing their best. It's not to necessarily critique them, but when you have a distance between who you are as an individual and who the author is, it makes it hard to really like hone in on what makes the book appealing. And I think a lot of times reps and publishers just fall back on, oh, it's a diverse book, you should read it, but they don't really engage you in like, this is a really interesting intergenerational story. This is Black historical fiction when we really haven't had a market for that over the last 10 to 15 years. And these are the things that I think are going to draw people in. It's not necessarily the diversity pick. That will work for some people, but I think, you know, especially for BIPOC and queer folks. I mean, as a queer person myself, I really want to know that the reason I should read this book is because it's a good story and it touches on elements of the queer experience that have been underrepresented. I don't want to necessarily just hear that it's a queer author that kind of checks a box for them.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I really like what you were saying about the work of the imprints and how it can sometimes get a little bit drowned out because, you know, there's only so many people working in marketing. There's only so many reps out there, and there's only so many books that every one of them knows. And I know working with some of the library and marketing reps, it's like, I'll bring up a book and they're like, wait, that's us. You know, like it happens every once in a while and you're like, this is a systemic thing. This is an issue. But you know, some of the, like you were saying, Simon and Schuster, I mean, they have Salam Reads now, and you know, Nicola Yoon just started, I think it's Joy Revolution with, I want to say Penguin, but I could be completely off. I think it's Penguin. You know, but all of these imprints that are starting to bring out like more and more. But at the same time, you don't want all the effort to be on, you know, the people, like you don't want it all to be on Cynthia Leidig Smith to do Indigenous publishing. You don't want it to be all on Nicola Yoon to do, you know, Black stories, Black love stories. You don't want it all to be on Salam Reads to do, you know, Muslim stories. You don't want, you know, all of these imprints to be siloed entirely. So I think there is a lot of work to do at the publisher level, just in terms of, you know, making sure that not only are they acquiring the books, because they do, but that they also market, like Sabina said, and they market them hard, because the books on the New York Times bestseller list, like they're selling themselves at that point. The authors have their fans, and those fans are going to buy whatever comes out next, no matter what it is, because they know the name. So that marketing money, it seems like it gets spent on the people who already, you know, have the fan base, but then the people without. I mean, that's so many stories I see of new authors getting signed and then getting dropped because their book didn't do well. And it's like, I never even saw an ad. I didn't know this book existed. And I feel like I'm someone who's pretty tapped into, you know, publishing. And if I didn't know it existed at all, then how would the average reader have any clue?
I also have another thought, if we have time.
Absolutely.
You know, like, I mean, my books, yes, they do, you know, the main characters happen to be from a Muslim background, but I don't necessarily want people to think of them like, oh, it's the Muslim book, or, you know, that's not really the point of my stories. Like they're just about normal teenagers who are going through normal, typical things that teenagers go through as they're, you know, going on with their lives, like the same struggles. It's not necessarily, you know, those things are not happening to them only because they happen to be Muslim. And, you know, to kind of promote a book based on just that one thing, that, oh, it's Muslim, and it's like a buzzword now because, you know, Islamophobia and, you know, Muslims, it's not really about that. It's, you know, like with Zara, it's not, yes, of course it is about that, but it's not only about that. It's about other things as well. And I feel like when you're marketing it, you can include so much more so that it appeals to more people who might, you know, who might hear, oh, Muslim, Islamophobia, I don't really want to read a sad book, you know, when actually maybe only parts of it are sad, maybe other parts are funny and lighthearted. I don't know, you know. So I feel like if you just use one or two labels constantly and then, you know, label the books, people might, you know, some people might not be open to that because they don't know, they've never read those kind of books, right? So I think there has to be more conversation, and there's plenty of opportunity to market the book in different ways. I mean, it's 2 years, like, you know, from the time you sign a book deal till the time it comes out, there's 2 years. There's plenty of time to, you know, tweet a little bit, post something. It's not really that, it's not like it's something that's so difficult to do. And I feel like, you know, you go on Instagram and you see the same posts over and over and over again. So I mean, I'm repeating myself at this point, but you know what I mean, right? It's just, you can't just use the one thing and then just talk about a book endlessly and only talk about that aspect of the book rather than, giving it a more rounded, well-rounded description, I guess.
Mhm. Do you mind? Oh, sorry, Yaunna, you go.
I was just gonna say, and I mean, it's so important to not only, like you guys mentioned earlier, not only have like the trauma stories within those communities and normalize like these people are just people, they're normal. It doesn't, it doesn't matter if they happen to be part of the LGBTQ community or if they happen to be, like it's important to, as a way to normalize that and make people comfortable with those communities, and everybody in all of these different communities that are being represented have such different stories, and even though they're within that same community, and so it's important to be able to see yourself represented in just a normal story, right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask a question?
go ahead.
Because DF and I had been discussing a little bit via email, and one of the things that came up was the idea of like supporting local and indie bookstores, but also, how can we do so without putting the onus entirely on those bookstores to do all the work, or how can we make sure not to overwhelm them, just because, we want to support. We don't want to burn them out or anything. And I think this is an important part of the discussion. So I'm wondering, DF, if you have any thoughts that you wanted to share on that topic.
Yeah, it's been a big thing. And for us, we're always glad to be that resource for folks because, it's our job to know these books. And especially with independent bookstores, we don't have the budgets or the means to, line the shelves with 1,000 copies of, the big, whatever the big seller is. So we really take pride in curating. And so coming to us and asking the questions and taking a look at the stock, I think is where it begins. Of course, with the towards more the question of like, how do you not burn us out as booksellers? It's pretty hard to do because again, like this is our jobs, this is our passion. But I think that looking at authors, we're in such a great age in a sense where if you really like an author, like say a Vivek Shraya, you can follow Vivek Shraya online and see what types of books, what types of media that she's promoting, and you can see who is publishing these authors, and then subsequently you can go to those publisher sites. I really wanted to give a big mention to Arsenal Pulp Press, who are a Vancouver-based publisher, and I think they're really doing a great job of doing. I really liked how you characterized it, Rob, as it's great that we have these imprints that are being run by the people who the stories are coming from, but again, it might have that siloing effect. I really like that terminology because it's something we try to avoid to do in the story. We don't have a Black fiction section. It's good fiction, so it just goes in the fiction section. And I think Arsenal, above most publishers, does the best job of publishing diverse and giving everybody the same platform for their marketing campaigns, and really allowing these stories to kind of sit together. And it's not, as Sabina was saying, like it's not just because it's a Muslim book or a queer book or a Black book. It's because it's a great story and there's nuance and there's depth. And yes, these elements are part of the story, but they're just like a small part. It's a jumping off point. But yeah, I think people just being a little bit more willing to dig through where books come from and who's publishing them, and getting to know that intimately, because I think it's something that we don't necessarily do as booksellers. We're always trying to be at Iron Dog anyways, more open about where books come from and how they get into your hands. And if you're receptive to that as a book buyer or as a reader, I think that really helps you understand where you can kind of pivot your attention and which authors and publishers you might want to support so that we can continue this groundswell into something that's just normalized rather than kind of little peaks and valleys over the course of a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Do you have any other questions, Yaunna? Or do we want to open it up to the audience?
Nothing specific. Yeah, I mean, I think we can open up to the audience if anybody has any questions, or if, if DF and Sabina, if you have anything else that you want to say or want to mention, because that's one of the biggest things that I always do as a journalist is, as we get close to the end, is ask, the person I'm talking to, is anything else that you want to mention, anything else that you've been wanting to say or think that you may have missed. So take it away.
Nobody wants to say anything at this
Everyone's
point.
quiet. I mean, I guess if you're talking about readers, I mean, they're already doing so much, like readers and bloggers and everybody, they're already shouting about our books so much. But it's like, if you read a book and you've really liked it, sometimes people just kind of, they read a book, they like it, and they don't tell anyone else about it, which is fine. They shouldn't feel like they have to, but that's also very helpful if they tell like 5 other people, so I don't know, that's the only other thing. Like when I was just a reader, when I wasn't writing books, I wasn't really going around yelling about books. I was just reading them and enjoying them. But, that was years ago. Like now it's different. Now people are on these platforms and they do have, just to mention books that they like, or, but then again, like we were saying, like it feels like then it's a lot of burden on one, on the readers. That's like, that shouldn't be their job to shout out about, to shout about books that aren't in the mainstream or something. But yeah, it's just a thought.
Absolutely.
I think that's a way people can definitely show up though. And, not just your friends. I think it's great when you tell your friends, tell your bookseller, tell your librarian, tell your teachers, especially tell your teachers. And I really like that Sabina brought up earlier about the library. It's not just requesting books too. It's if there's a book that you're really jazzed about and you see that there's like a 60-person hold on it, put a hold on it anyway. You may never get it from the library. You may decide to go to a different branch. You may decide to go to a store and just, cave in, I need to read this book. But as long as you keep your hold on that, that shows the library that there's a demand. And I think, that's a really big thing. I have earned a little bit of a reputation as a book yeller when folks are in the store browsing and I see they have something in their hands that I really liked. I do think it's so crucial for readers to project their excitement about reading, especially with younger readers, because if people get the sense that a book is an exciting thing, I think most people who are I'm sure everybody on the panel, but everybody watching, they have a passion for books and they find books exciting. And so if we can kind of transfer that off to folks who are maybe, more casual readers and get them to understand that there's just so much richness, so many amazing stories out there, I think it goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm also a bit of a book yeller. I'm not a seller, like I don't work at a bookstore, but I have definitely gone in Langley here. We have the Indigo. I still keep calling it chapters. We have the Indigo, and I keep going in there, and every time I hear somebody like asking somebody about, they ask like one of the salespeople about books, and if that person doesn't have an answer, I'm like walking over there. I'm like, oh, let me tell you. And the person either looks so relieved or they're just like, oh my gosh, another know-it-all. But either way, I'm like, look at these books, and like inevitably they'll like get one because it's the excitement that helps hugely. Yeah, so I mean, talking about the books is great. Bringing it up to, yeah, like you say, librarians. I mean, I used to, because in the Fraser Valley Regional Library, we have a bit of a floating collection that goes between a whole bunch of branches. And I know a lot of LGBTQ plus youth here were, like, oh, well, they don't have anything in the library because they weren't sitting right on the shelf. They were in the system, but they didn't really know how to use the system, or they didn't know what to look for. So I used to just go through the collection and I would like request like all these books so that they would come into that library, and then I would return them, and then they would sit on the shelf there until they were requested from somewhere else, so that at least, you know, there was the opportunity. So like just things like that can be super helpful at help, like, you know, getting circulation up and getting titles out, and yeah. So, oh.
And in those regions too, I think that's something that a lot of folks, we've seen it as Iron Dog's Indigenous owned, and we've found ourselves on a lot of lists over the last few years of Indigenous owned businesses. And we had to make the conscious effort to say, we're not going to ship outside of BC or the territories, because, you know, it is, people's intentions are always really great, but if you're all the way out in Toronto, there are so many factors that just don't, it's not a reasonable thing. A lot of books come from Toronto. Most of the major publishers, Canadian offices are there, and if not there, they're on the Eastern Seaboard in the US. And so it's kind of like going from Toronto to Vancouver, and then we're shipping it back out. But kind of to Rob's point, it's if the bookstores, the libraries in your local community are constantly getting requested these books, they're going to hopefully make an effort to have them. And those numbers transfer on to publishers, and they start to see that, you know, people requesting Indigenous content books or books by queer authors, Black authors, wherever, are not just limited to businesses that are owned by people who are Indigenous or queer. It's, you know, it's everywhere. And it's something that we cannot stress enough. If you support your local bookstore or your local library, you're truly local, like the closest bookstore to you, closest library to you, it really goes a long way in diversifying the collection that they're going to carry.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think it looks like Sikmani wants us to ask. So this is, three of you can answer this. What was the one book that changed things for you and really lit a fire beneath you?
I can start really quick, because I think we're pretty much at the end of our time, but I think we each have a chance to say quickly anyway. Mine was Boy Meets Boy by David Levithan, just because it was the first time I actually saw, it was a secondary character, but it was the first time I actually saw a queer kid who was, you know, in a Christian family, and that was totally my background. And so seeing that on the pages was an incredibly, it was just an incredible experience. So that was the book that definitely got me interested much more in reading and getting into this industry.
I can go next. So I read, when I moved to the States a few years after, I found a book called Arranged Marriages. It was a collection of short stories by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, who was she's an Indian American. And it was about, basically it was about the immigrant experience, which was my experience at the time. And it was, you know, it was the first time I'd read stories which, you know, where the characters they had similar experiences to mine. And it was so eye-opening, and it lit a fire under me, not as a reader, but as a writer. I mean, I always loved books. I was always reading books before that. I just never realized that I would find stories that had, you know, that were about people like us. And so that was, I think that's when it kind of lit a fire in me, where I thought, you know, I always wanted to be a writer as a kid, but it just kind of fell by the wayside, because it was just one of those things like, who's going to want to read stories about, you know, any of the stories I want to tell. And so that was really, really a very profound experience for me.
I would say it was the collected stories of Billy the Kid, Left-Handed Stories by Michael Ondaatje. Just because from a stylistic standpoint and from what Ondaatje does with form, it just blew my mind. Like, I was so used to reading a novel, you know, end to end. The story starts, there's the rising action, all your typical kind of plot points. And here you have a collection that is not just a narrative, but there's like epistolary, there's, you know, like letters, there's poems. There is this really interesting dance between nonfiction and fiction. And that just set it off for me. I was like, you know, story can be so much bigger than just a story that follows a linear path.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us and having this awesome conversation, and continue it, you know, online, and keep going and just keep writing. Keep reading, keep writing, and continue these conversations.
Keep yelling about books.
Yes, exactly.
All the yelling, all the book yelling. I love that term now. I'm going to use it.
Yes, book yelling. Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Looking forward to tomorrow as well.
Oh, yes. It's going to be good.
Sorry, that was so slightly ominous of Rob. Oh, yes.
Be ready for debate club, guys.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. I do have to run, but I know there's still some time left for the rest of y'all. But thank you again, and I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you tomorrow. And it was really great to chat with you both, DF and Sabina, and you as well, Yaunna. And have a great night, everybody.
You too. Bye.
Rob.
Bye.
Yes, on behalf of the team and I, thank you all so much for joining us today and for taking the time out on this Friday night. That's kind of getting darker as the sun went down, and not just because the sun is going down. I'm a bit worried, but yeah, thank you all so much for taking the time. We are so excited for tomorrow, and we hope to see you all there as well. Have a great night. Take care.
You
and stay
too.
safe.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Bye.